Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here to share with you on our third segment on the paradigm has shifted. The paradigm has shifted. You know, we're in some very turbulent time. We're in some times that are kind of fluid, that are changing. And there are things that we can learn in the change. What are you learning in the change? What have you learned in the change? And what do you intend to do because of the change? So today I want to talk about, I think, an important part that really helps us with this changing moment. And that is how attuned are we to the Spirit of God? How attuned are we to the movement of the Spirit in the midst of our current crisis? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And hopefully we can draw something that will help us in the context that we're in. The paradigm has shifted, part 3. The Spirit is still moving. The Spirit is still moving. I believe that's a thought that we should keep in mind, that even from the beginning of time as we know it, that the Spirit is still moving, even from the time that the outpouring of the Spirit happened at Pentecost with the Christ followers on that day. That self-same Spirit is still moving. The Spirit is still moving. And so before we get into looking at some details about this aspect of the paradigm shift, let's review what we've already covered. From the beginning, we talked about a paradigm being a model, a pattern, a way of doing things. We learned that every aspect of life is influenced or governed by a paradigm. We learned that paradigms are preceded by some test. And we spent some substantial time talking about tests and looking at different types of tests and to see what the value of those tests are and how they relate to a paradigm shift. So we learned that paradigms are preceded by some tests, which whether we are prepared for or not, we will respond or react to what's presented to us. Responding takes some forethought. Reacting is a knee-jerk, as it were. Paradigm shifts occur after something challenges our accepted or established norms. Let me say that again. Paradigm shifts occur after something challenges our accepted or established norms. Paradigm shifts do not always occur immediately and often is resisted by the established order or status quo. So today I'm going to talk about paradigms in terms of concepts that we can commonly identify with. Jesus, instructing his followers, would often use examples from their everyday life to convey some spiritual or even a universal truth that was necessary for that group of people to understand Yahweh's plans. These simple and sometimes complex truths were conveyed through the use of parables. The use of parables were and still are a common practice by Afro-Asiatic and Eastern sages. So let's go back to the beginning. We're going to go back to the book of Genesis, beginning in chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, and I'm quoting from the New Revised Standard Version. But let's go back there and let's understand some things in regards to this segment that we're going to deal with today. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless, void, and darkness covered the face of the deep. While a wind from God swept over the face of the waters, then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about creation, or are we talking about recreation? From the commentary, critical and explanatory on the whole Bible, James Fawcett and Brown, this is what they had to say about this particular verse. The earth was without form and void, or in confusion and emptiness, as the words are rendered in Isaiah 34:11. This globe, at some undescribed period, having been convulsed and broken up, was a dark and watery waste for ages, perhaps, till out of this chaotic state, the fabric of the world was made to arise. Out of this chaotic state, the fabric of the world was made to arise. In the JPS Torah commentary on the book of Genesis, this is what they had to say. The earth was unformed and void, which is the Hebrew word tohu or vatohu. This compound phrase appears again in the Bible and Jeremiah's prophetic vision of the return of the primal chaos. This compound phrase appears again in the Bible in Jeremiah's prophetic vision of the return of the primal chaos. And you can find that in Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 23 to 27. And you can go and read this on your own. Thus leaving no doubt that the phrase designates the initial chaotic state of the earth. So, from these two commentaries, and probably there's some others that would probably weigh in on this, that the idea at this particular time, however we believe it, whether it was creation or recreation, the globe, as it were, the planet, as it were, was in a state of chaos. It was in a chaotic state. But something happened. The Spirit of God moved. Literally, the word moved means continue brooding over, as a fowl does when hatching eggs. The Spirit of God basically brooded, hovered over the earth as a fowl would do when hatching eggs. The JPS Torah commentary says that the Spirit of God moved. It refers to the Spirit of God moving as a wind from God. In the ruah, in Hebrew, the word wind of God or spirit means ruah, which means what? Wind, breath, or spirit. And wind is the most popular rendering of the word in ancient and medieval Jewish sources. So the meaning for the use of this account, that we believe it's creation or recreation. The earth was in a chaotic state. And one way to interpret this passage as a correlation to our time is that we currently find ourselves in a state of chaos resulting from the pandemic. So, the Spirit of God moved. Is God saying something to us in the midst of this pandemic? Or are we wanting to hear words that appeal to the status quo? Are we wanting to hear words that appeal to our comfort zone? Or are we wanting to hear words that things are going to return to normal? Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. However we perceive the moment that we're in, it is very clear that we are undergoing and still are in a paradigm shift. A world that we once knew will not be the same way it has been in the past. And I believe that if we're going to be good stewards and faithful, then we need to realize I need to find a plan. I need to find God's way for me, God's way for my business, God's way for my family, God's way for my church. How are we going to adjust and participate in what's obvious? We're undergoing a paradigm shift. Maybe God is saying something in the midst of what we're doing, or maybe God is saying something in the midst of what we're going through. Put it that way. Something that we need to hear. Is God talking to us through what we're going through? Is he saying something to us that we need to hear? Have we heard him? Or are we listening? Or are we still, as Jesus many times referred to his disciples, that they are dull of hearing? Words that will shift the way we believe. Maybe God is saying something. He's giving us words that will what? Shift the way we believe. Words that will shift how we do things. Now let's think about this for a moment. Let's consider the Samaritan woman and Jesus, that narrative that we find in the Gospel of John. And we know the story. I'm pretty sure that some of you preachers out there probably have preached this 100 times, to get a point out to your congregation. But by purpose of revisiting the text, I want us to consider what we just read, what we just heard, that maybe something we're going through we need to hear. Maybe there's some words that God's trying to give us that will shift the way we believe, words that will shift how we do things. Well, we're going to see some of the semblance of that shift in this interaction between the Samaritan woman and Jesus. Now, I'm not going to go and read there, but you can go and read it in the Gospel of John. But I'm just going to kind of paraphrase the story. And the story is that Jesus was thirsty, and he went to this particular well, and he sat on it. And a woman from Samaria had approached, and he said to the woman, "Give me something to drink." And the woman's response, she was startled that, number one, that this Jew is talking to her. And secondly, he stepped outside of the normal interaction of culture. He's a man, and he's talking to me openly. And so Jesus basically was violating, some cultural norms and mores. Let me tell you, sometimes, God does not always regard and respect our cultural norms and mores when he's trying to get his point across. He will step down in the midst of it, and he will speak to us. Sometimes these modes of living and these mores and this concretized form of that we have involved ourselves in, it may be something that he hasn't had anything to do with shaping at all. Maybe that's something that we came up with. Maybe because that we feel safe and that's our comfort zone. But when God is trying to move us to a place of shifting our thinking and shifting how we do things, sometimes he does it through drastic measures or in the midst of something that's drastic. I'm saying that maybe in what we've experienced in the last 12 months, I'm not saying that God released this pandemic, But what I am saying, because of the pandemic, maybe this is God's way of getting his people to open up their eyes, to see things differently, and to begin to do things a different way. So this interaction between the Samaritan woman and Jesus went on. And so how is it that you, being a Jew, you're going to ask me to give you something to drink? So Jesus engaged her a little bit further and said, look, if you knew who I was, if you knew the gift of God, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. And she said, well, you don't have anything to draw with. Give me this living water, so I don't have to come back here again. And so the conversation went on. And then finally, it gets down to the brass tacks about worship, about where to worship. And in him talking to the woman, she said, well, look, you say Jerusalem is a place where we ought to worship. Our ancestors, have identified this well here as to be an important aspect within our history. And Jesus said something to her that was very profound. Jesus said something to her, I think, that we still need to hear. And when Jesus spoke to the woman, this is what he said, that the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. He said that it won't be worshiping here in this mountain, nor will it be worshiping over there in Jerusalem. In other words, that true worshipers geographically are not limited in how they express themselves to God. Some people feel like the only place that they can worship is in a building. Is in a building that has stained glass windows or some faction, chairs, a pulpit, and they're comfortable with worshiping in that particular within that particular model. Some people are comfortable worshiping outside, but the idea is that the hour is coming that it's not the location that where people worship, it's the location of people's heart who worship. Not the location geographically, but the location spiritually. And so he says, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And it's those individuals that God is looking for. And so this was a conversation that he had with the woman. He wanted to shift the way she was believing. He wanted to give her words that she needed to hear. And he wanted to also shift how she was doing things. So that's one of the things we can learn from the Samaritan woman, that Jesus identified that the building or the place is not the locale by which God can be worshiped. God can be worshiped anywhere. He does not need brick and mortar. We have just been used to worshiping God in ways that we've grown up to really understand. So let me introduce a concept that I think is important here. The church is pregnant. The church is pregnant. The birth of the church in Acts was intended to be a seamless transition in Israel's history. Notice I said it was intended. All that they heard about the Messiah, now is the time he arrives on the scene. And the promise of his spirit would be the endowment that would put God within them. That was the purpose. That's what salvation is about. It's about God dwelling on the inside of you. It's about God in you. And so And when God's on the inside of us, then we can be a people that would please him by walking in his ways. As we know, the established religious order of Jesus' day resisted this movement and reacted to this movement. Let's think about it. From day one of Jesus launching his ministry, there was a resistance to the way he was doing things. Yet, the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the religious order that day could not deny what? The movement of the Spirit, the endowment of God's grace upon him to do the things that he was doing, whether it be miracles, whether it would be interpreting the text of the Torah. It didn't matter what. He had a following. And we find that following did not emerge from people who were in the religious or the established religious order. Jesus' following emerged from a group of people that were marginalized, emerged from a group of people that felt injustice, that were oppressed by the powers that be. So his movement was resisted. Even from the day that he gave his inaugural sermon there in Luke 4:18, when he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and he's anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, to preach deliverance to the captives, to recovering of sight to the blind, to heal the brokenhearted," etc., etc. All from that inaugural sermon, when he sat down after quoting from the book of Isaiah, when he said, "This day, this scripture is fulfilled in your ears." The moment that he said that, they were ready to leap upon him and throw him headlong over a cliff. Because what he was saying, he's saying that I'm the person in the passage. I am the Messiah. He was identifying who he was. But this movement was resisted. Furthermore, it eventually, in their eventual resisting of him, they lynched him. They lynched Jesus on a tree, which was short-lived by his resurrection 3 days later, and the renewal of his spirit, of the renewal of his disciples by his Spirit on the day of Pentecost. Second, that religious order, often in concert with the Roman Empire, feared losing their place. Now let me talk about that for a moment. One of the resistance to a paradigm shift is fear. Sometimes people are afraid of losing their power, fear of losing their place. And so the religious order of Jesus' day were often in concert with the Roman Empire, and this particular religious group of leaders were in fear of losing their place, fear of losing their power, and resisted the change brought on by these rebel rousers claiming that a resurrected Jesus is alive and lives through them. So we see that, wow, man, these guys have really caused a problem. You know, we've got a problem here. Everybody is gone after Jesus. And this group of disciples said they've seen him, and boy, everybody's moving in the direction. Hence, their resistance took on the form of an organized suppression and oftentimes a violent persecution campaign. Yet one of their highly esteemed religious persecutors departed from their faith, their status quo, and shifted from the paradigm that endorsed him. Saul was his name, who later became Apostle Paul, joined this band of perceived lunatics because it was clear to him the handwriting was on the wall. I am wrong. God is still speaking, yet not in a way I had originally thought. Later, we find Rome, in the form of Constantine, came to its senses that if you can't beat them, join them. And he made the Jews' religion Rome's religion and called it Catholicism. Now, this movement had morphed from being a movement into the violent actions of the Crusades ending in the 1500s, afflicting upon people who would refuse to believe the way they believed and to follow their path. Now, the movement underwent another paradigm shift sparked by the catalyst Martin Luther, which was a German university professor at Wittenberg. He was a priest and a monk in the tradition of Augustine, the church father of African descent. Martin Luther wrote his famous 95 Theses on the door of Wittenberg in 1519, stating that the just live by faith. His efforts, although resisted and considered heretical, resulted in the Protestant Reformation, which is also the birthplace of evangelicalism. Can we see how this movement, although at first resisted, gave birth to a different path, and in some ways, a better and more improved path to approaching God? Like all paths born of the Spirit. And I'm saying that Protestantism was a move of the Spirit. I'm saying that evangelicalism in its early phases was a move of the Spirit. But let me say this, like all paths born of the Spirit that are guided by human will, tend toward human error if a freshness is not maintained with the Spirit's prompting. Let me say that one more time. Like all paths born of the Spirit, and we just named a few. We talked about Protestantism, we talked about evangelicalism, we can even talk about Pentecostalism, we can talk about the charismatic renewal, we can talk about any movement that has been alive and well within church history. Like all paths born of the Spirit that are guided by human will, tend toward human error if those humans do not maintain a freshness that can only come from the Spirit's prompting. What easily starts out as a movement spreading the good news, what easily starts out as a movement spreading the good news of Jesus and performing good deeds can progressively become a monument displaying its golden statues, spouting a type of Christian rhetoric that Jesus cares more about the life of the unborn than those who are living in the periphery. What easily starts out as a movement spreading the good news, spreading the good news of Jesus, performing these good deeds, whether it be healing the sick, acts of social justice or whatever it might be, caring for our neighbor. That movement can become a monument. And when that becomes a monument, we can have the kind of things that we have seen recently, golden statues, or the kind of Christian rhetoric that's out there that cares more about the life of the unborn, of those who live on the periphery, those oppressed by injustice, impoverished by a broken economic system, and brokenhearted by the generational trauma of slavery from a nation that calls itself Christian. Again, I believe the church is pregnant. A change has arrived, maybe not by the hands of God, but most certainly affecting all paths within Christendom. The paradigm is shifted on how we be the church, on how we do the church. A recent quote says, we are in different boats, but encountering the same storm. When I read Acts 1:8, it says, when the Spirit comes upon you, you will be a witness. And oftentimes when I interpret that passage and read it from a devotional standpoint, the first thing the Spirit does when He works in our hearts is that we be before we ever do. We have to become something. The Spirit is working on us that we can become something. This paradigm shift is occurring because I believe the church is pregnant and the Lord wants His people to become something better before they do something worse, before they do something that's in error, or before they just simply do the simple works that Jesus has authorized us to do. We're in different boats, but we're encountering the same storm. But what is God telling us through the storm? What is He telling us in the pandemic? It's been 12 months. Are we heeding His message? Or are we still craving for the way things used to be? It's too early to tell what the paradigm will look like, but life is in the womb. The church is pregnant. The paradigm has shifted. Well, I hope you've been stirred today to really think about this in practical terms on how do I adjust to the paradigm? How do I adjust to the times that we're now in? Am I still craving for the way things used to be? Am I still trying to find someone to blame for why we can't do things the way we used to do them? Am I obeying the science and also obeying the faith? I believe you can do both. I believe you can obey the science and obey the faith. But we're in a time that's affecting every one of us. A time that's forcing all of us to reflect upon what's in us based upon what we're experiencing outside of ourselves. The paradigm is shifting. What will be your response? What will be your work and your word and your movement? Come back next time as we talk about the paradigm is shifted, part 4. We're looking to learn some things that are practical, not just theoretical, but things that we can actually embrace and employ and be better and do better. See you next time. God bless.